Hey man,
How's it
how are
going?
you?
Doing good.
So we're here. Welcome back to the Historical Fencing channel. Um, we got fencing video review going on today. My camera's a little wonky because technology, but that'll be okay. And I have my Hoplark 0.0, which is not. They are not sponsors, official sponsors of this show, but definitely you should check them out anyway because that's what's cool in the world. All right, so I have here Josias. So hey man, why don't you introduce yourself real quick? We'll talk a little bit about what we're going to get into today.
All right. So, my name's Josias. I've been fencing probably like on and off. I want to say around 10, 12 years. First team instructor for about 6 months was one of I can never remember the name. Christian Tobler's students. So that was like my first uh, toe dip into HEMA, and then I took quite a long break, started self studying after I moved, then got into Minnesota Sword Club back when it was still called that, and learned Rebellion Sabers, a Hut and single stick, and uh, the longsword method that they were teaching there. Um, and kind of what I've been struggling with personally is a lot of like realizing where my basics are just weird and wonky from doing all those like old school HEMA practices and like
Yeah.
and whatnot. So um, yeah, that's kind of my journey right now. Is like as a person who's been doing this for a while, trying to like take it back to the building blocks and get better again. So
Right. It's always. I think it's always. I think it's good for any of us. Um, when we have a moment, we have someone to help us sort of look critically at what we're doing. It doesn't matter where we are in our journey, right? Like
yeah,
we're always going to see things about our practice that we need to fix or want to develop. Not even fix. I wouldn't even call it fixing, right? Because you know what you do or what anyone does isn't bad. Isn't it? It's never bad, right? It's just like something that can be made even better than it
yeah,
is, right? And that's true for like literally every human in
yeah.
every practice.
And
You
and
know,
I had this thought the other day. Not to be too corny and bleeding heart about it, but like it kind of feels to me that like in my earlier years of doing historical fencing, whatever you want to call it, I've picked up habits and things that served, right? They did a job,
hmm
kind of like, what do they call it in therapy? Like, your survival tools when you've been
yeah, yeah,
having
yeah, yeah. The
difficult time.
coping mechanisms,
Coping
right?
mechanism. Yes, exactly. That's it's like kind of what it is, right? So that's kind of what I'm looking at trying to get coaching from different people and like realize, oh wait, I'm doing this weird thing here because that's a coping mechanism that served somewhere else.
Yeah,
You
right,
know.
right.
So,
And it may be, and one thing that I like to think about a lot when it comes to this type of thing is like if there's any benefit to a thing at all, right? Like
yeah,
if there's any way, if there's any context in which performing a particular action or developing a certain sensitivity or a certain approach, tactical approach, whatever the case may be, right? If there's any context in which that paradigm is valuable,
mhm,
right? Um, then that paradigm is valuable,
yeah,
right? Full stop. It does a job. It does its thing. It's worth knowing. It's worth understanding, right?
yeah,
It may be the least efficient avenue to take of all of the avenues that you could possibly take, and yet it's still beneficial to understand. And what we should ask isn't necessarily why is that wrong? What is right?
yeah,
Right? What we should ask is what is the context in which that is an appropriate course of action, right? And then we say, like, okay, how is that context different from what I might encounter elsewhere, right? What is a better course of action that accounts for a greater context, right? That accounts for a larger variety of potential circumstances or potential conditions of my environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah.
So like, so there's nothing, you say, well, that doesn't work, right? Well, that's not true, right? Like mother, like, what are you talking about? Like, I do this and it works,
Yeah.
right? And you're like, no, what I really mean is that won't work against people who do this,
Right.
right? And there's like, oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
And so, like, what's a better way that accounts for more people, right?
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, so anyway, all right, great. So we have a pickup out. So we just got back from Icebreaker. You you did some fencing, you did some tournament fencing, but you also did some pickup bouts. And tell me a little bit about this one, or what the context was. Like, where were you in the tournament when all this was going down?
Okay. So I forgot to mention in my intro, I'm also a burgeoning coach. I'm trying to figure this out, right? I run a club called Ram's Head Fencing. My students did excellent, really proud of them, mainly in how they comported themselves as fencers. And they fenced their own game no matter what. And this was at the end of the tournament, this pickup bout that happened. It was, I want to say, like a little bit after the mixed steel had finished up and wrapped up, and I just fenced a ton of messer bouts. Um, and I saw that he was fencing some pickup bouts, and I was like, I want to get in on this because I'd seen him last year at Icebreaker, and I noticed that his movement was really like explosive. He was very accurate, and he was really good at pressuring his opponents. So I was like really excited to fence this guy. Last year, didn't get a chance to. So,
Just so that we're clear, because we've been talking about him, but we haven't said his name. So who is this guy?
So this is Zach Brown from Superior HEMA. I think his club is in Thunder Bay, Canada.
Is that near or adjacent to Lake Superior by any chance?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
so he's not it's not Superior HEMA because he's just so much better than all the rest of us. Maybe he is.
He's pretty good.
At least there's something going on there.
Yeah. It's a good pun. If I lived any closer to Lake Superior, I would probably take it. He lives about 5 hours, I think, north of us. So you mentioned like coming down and getting more training in, and us going up there. So it was a really fun bout. I picked this bout to analyze because, for one, it was after I was fairly well exhausted.
Yeah.
For two, there were fewer like external emotional factors going on that day.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
That's a huge part of it.
Yep. So like one of the things that I struggle with personally is I care too much. Right. I care too much about looking good and fencing good and winning and blah 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 and all that crap, and it actually like it definitely affects what I'm able to do. And because my body's full of tension, I'm getting nausea, I'm getting like anxiety and like having trouble eating and stuff like that. So I've got to like so this bout had none of that.
Right.
This bout had, and so it felt like I was really able to just focus on the fencing, and it was still at like he was already like warmed up, had like several bouts going, and I went in just kind of cold, and I wanted to see what I could do. I mean, like not fully cold because I just fenced a bunch of the mixed steel bouts, but I hadn't been doing like intense bouts for at least like 30 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what the kind of context is behind it.
Nice.
Mental state, and I just wanted to learn from the guy and just like
sure
kind of test myself, if you will.
Great. Yeah. I think, I mean, I can't speak highly enough of that mindset. I talk a lot about this idea that when we take our skills, when we're taking a skill that we want to develop within ourselves and within our practice, and we put it in this sort of sort of workflow, right?
Yeah.
So like you don't start trying to integrate the skill into your broader practice until you've taken it through a series of steps, right? Where you like just basically learn how to do the action, right? Do the movement pattern. Do it without any constraints. Do it without any rhythm that you're worried about trying to fit it into, right? Just physically put the correct mechanics in the correct order, right? And it's like once you've demonstrated that you can do that reliably, right? Like once you can do that 10 times out of 10, right? And the moment someone says, okay, now put it into rhythm, all of a sudden you can't even do it at all. All of a sudden you can only do it like 2 times out of 10. You're like, no, it doesn't take long to get it into rhythm, right? Especially if you've gone through the process of like making sure that you can do it 10 times out of 10 out of rhythm,
Yep.
right? But never become frustrated with yourself because you're adding a new layer of context, right? You're adding a new
Yeah.
layer of difficulty to the skill because it's a different skill. Just because you can do it out of rhythm doesn't mean that you can necessarily do it in rhythm. And just
Right.
because you can do it in rhythm doesn't mean you can do it in context, doesn't mean you can do it
Yeah.
with feeling, doesn't mean you can do it at the correct intensity. So we have to graduate our development in each skill. And we have to remember that like new contexts, right, that are like so much more intense. We'll say like a tournament bout, right?
Mhm.
A tournament bout is an incredibly more complex level of difficulty,
Yeah.
right? Than just doing something where you have no emotional stake in, um, you have no emotional skin in the game, um, or doing something where where things aren't on the line, and so like or where the people aren't watching, right? That's another thing too. It's another thing too. If you take people who are successful tournament fencers and you put them in a context where they're not tournament fencing, but they're being watched, right? So it's a demonstration bout, we'll say.
Mhm.
There's 40, 50 people that know what fencing is supposed to look like, and you're supposed to fence in front of those people, right? All of a sudden, that new layer of context is going to completely short circuit everything, right? If you
Mhm.
don't have any practice, if you've never had any experience doing demo fencing, then your first experience doing demo fencing is going to look like it's going to look terrible, right? Because of course it is. It's a new thing. Um, and so like we need to remember to develop in all of those areas. We need to not be surprised when we aren't performing the way that we feel like we should when we're experiencing like radically new contexts. And then we should also take time in environments that are less constrained, right? So we should feel good about doing pickup bouts that we don't really have skin in the game and we're not, you know what I'm saying? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so that's really really great. There's a lot of good stuff I saw in the video. It's pretty. It's the type of fencing that you're doing, both of you are doing, is pretty comparable to what you might expect in a tournament, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's good. Let's get right into it. So I'm gonna probably, I don't know. We'll see. I'll play a little bit of it. I'm probably gonna end up slowing it down to 25%, pretty
Yeah.
quickly, but we'll watch
Yeah.
a few.
It was a and that's part of why I chose it, right? Is because like I just spent all these messer bouts that were really low intensity for competition. Like,
Yeah,
and I felt good about that. I felt good about the fact that like instead of being really, hot headed and striking fast and all this stuff, I tried to set those messer bouts as slowly as possible. And then now I'm going back to this like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
yeah,
There's something to be said about that too. We won't get into it today, but just the
yeah,
idea that you can set the pace of the bout,
yep,
right? Even with someone who's really trying their best to hit you,
yeah,
you can force things to slow down, right? Because if someone is behaving radically out of tempo, and by tempo I don't mean fencing tempo, I mean the rate of the beat, right? Like
yep,
music tempo. If someone's fencing like their beat is happening so much faster than yours, then it's going to be a little too chaotic for them to be successful. And so if you
Yeah.
slow your beat down, that necessarily constrains them at least a little bit, right?
Yep.
So yeah, but anyway, so we'll get into it here. I'll turn this on, and we'll just slow down 25. We'll play it. We'll play a bit of it. Okay. Actually, do you know what happened in that first exchange?
I think I tapped him on the head a little bit, but it wasn't
Yeah.
very.
Yeah, it looked like you may have. I don't know if it wasn't very good. I thought it was fine. I'm of the school that if you touch me with your sword, I count that as a hit for you. I don't
Yeah,
care
same.
if there's, edge alignment stuff going on. But yeah, so immediately very explosive in and out footwork from is his name Zach?
I believe it's Zach. Yes.
Yeah. So very explosive in and out footwork from Zach. Very, um good fencing on his part. I like what you're doing here too. So we just come to this distance, right? So right now you guys are what I would call the Sufechten distance, which is to say that
Hmm.
um, neither of you are in a situation where you're proportionately stronger in terms of like a provoker or a taker.
Hmm.
Um, and so like you're kind of using you're testing each other, you're testing the distance, you're testing to see if you can get openings. And like I said, we're looking at explosive in and out footwork from Zach's part. So he's basically mitigating your ability to threaten a hitter or even a provoker, right? Because if you try and provoke and he's out of distance all of a sudden, then he could potentially take and leave you in a weak position, right?
Yeah.
So that's great. But on your part, you're just doing what you should be doing, which is holding the line, right? Getting a good, strong posture. Look at this posture; it's beautiful. This is like perfect fencing posture. I know we spent a lot of time talking about it, but like, look at the alignment here, right? You can see that your alignment is perfectly sound, right? Everything is channeling all of any direction of force right into the ground. So we'll continue here. He's threatening a hand strike. This is good. This is good fencing on his part. You're doing exactly what you should be doing, which is because that strike is happening so fast. You should not be committing, to his head or to anything else, and you shouldn't necessarily be committing to the parry either. Um, just use distance to sort of mitigate those explosive tag hits. All right, so now here,
Hmm.
he's in Shrank,
Yep.
and what are you doing?
I'm trying to press him here, if I remember correctly, but would not take his bait, right? Because like I see Shrank and I go, no. I go, I'm just gonna
Well,
leave a point here and see what you do about it.
right, so you actually start to do interesting things with your sword. So like your sword, you can see the alignment of your sword right here. The point is kind of in Zach's face. Zach goes to Shrank, and then you kind of start pressing down with your strong against his Shrank, right?
Mm,
So watch it again. Right there. Do you see what you're doing?
yeah, yeah.
So, and that's not necessarily the best way to approach
Okay,
mitigating any action that he has from there,
okay.
right? Um, what I like to do against people in Shrank is I'll either I'll point my sword at their hands, or I'll point my sword at their sword, right? So,
Okay.
but I keep a strong structure, right? If you keep your point, if you don't align your point towards their sword, right, then it's easy for them to beat your sword out of the way.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So, so for instance, if I have my sword actually do have a sword right here. I don't know. So here's my sword. And if I'm standing like this and I push my strong towards the angle of his sword, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he was to push up on my sword this way, it would completely break my structure.
Yeah, I see.
Right. So if someone is approaching me in strength from just outside of distance, what I'll often do is I'll just point at their sword.
Okay.
Either point at their hands or point at their sword. And what that does is it just makes my sword strong in that direction. And it makes anything that they do have to contend with that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So you're kind of levering your sword down at that a little bit.
Yeah. So instead of sort of having instead of pushing my strong down and giving them an opportunity to take my sword, I just point at them.
Okay.
He doesn't bite on that anyway. I probably would have, if you would have done that to me, I probably would have immediately thrusted from strength up through your weak, just because your weak was broken off of your strong. And that would have probably given me a chase there if I didn't hit immediately. But he goes back to Vamtag. So that looked like a good strong parry, right? So it looked like your alignment was angled in the direction of Zach's sword, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which closed that and gave you a strong position in measure. At this point, you guys are both in measure. So you have a strong position here, and you're in measure. And then he raises his hilt in defense of that strong position, right? So you had two options here. Do you know what your two options were in that moment?
Stab.
Yeah, you could have stabbed. And so the stab may have happened one of two ways. You could have stabbed, you could have done like a Mutirin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a potential to hit a short edge strike to the top of his head on that side.
Okay.
So like this kind of a hanging guard, or like a left ox, right? So from this position, you could have hit a short edge to the top of the head, or you could have just stabbed, like taken control of his blade with your short edge and then mutated as he lifted his hilt. A lot of times we end up going straight for the head, and the movement of the hilt is actually, the movement of his hilt in this moment. We'll look at this again real quick. So we're here. So you have strong position, and so it looks like he's about to lift his hilt right here. So watch his hilt come up right there. You see how his hilt starts to come up, and what he's doing is he's mitigating your thrust to his face, right?
Yes.
So in that moment, right, and so you already get a sense of where his head is at, right? Both metaphorically and literally. So you're not going to stab directly to his face, and that's what he's trying to prevent, right? But if you would have kept your weight kind of on your forward foot and stepped laterally with this foot, with your left foot, to your left, right? So in this direction, and lifted your strong to his weak, then you would have set yourself up for a Mutirin.
Okay.
And it would have made his strike around. The other thing that he wants to do is he wants to defend the thrust to the head and then strike around to this side, right? He wants to do a left overhow. That's kind of where his head is at. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in this case, you mitigate that by, instead of targeting through his strong, right, you target through his weak. And then if you can get better advantage, then your thrust is more meaningful. And then you could take it either if you can get your strong all the way to his weak, you can take it to the face. Or if he continues to hang, you can control his blade and mutate into his belly.
Okay.
So let's watch that one more time. So right there, beautiful, strong position. This is right now. If you knew that you were going to get this, you could have immediately thrusted him. It's hard to know exactly whether or not he's going to leave himself in this position or he's working indes. So you did the right thing by waiting with your taker. Then right here, I would have immediately moved my left foot to my left, wound my hilt towards his weak, and watched what he did. As he goes to hang, you could have mutated. So right there, boom, I would have been mutating already. Now, you kept a strong position here. That's perfect. That's perfectly fine.
I think what
is sort
of this desire to bounce back and retreat.
Yeah.
From like not really trusting that new concept of strength that I've been working. You know what I mean? Like
for sure. Yeah. Then that's great. Like honestly, like stick with it. We'll get to depends on how far we get into the video, but there are parts in this video where you kind of abandon that. And so like for me, I would personally prefer you do what you're doing here, which is just like get comfortable with being strong and like seeing how well you can maintain it frequency modus, right? Like as movement happens, maintaining that position of strength. And then you'll start to, your openings will become clearer, right? Okay. The worst thing that you can do is neither of you are strong and both of you are stepping in. Right? And we'll see iterations of that as we go forward. But yeah, you maintain the position of strength here, and it's just that basic maintenance, right? Where you're here, so you're strong, he pulls back, he goes again, you're still strong, and then yeah, you hit him there. I actually might have even been a thrust, and it's just because you have that position of strength, right? You have the position of strength, and so you taking that opening over here, boom, right here, yeah. So that looks, you at least make contact with the mask right around here.
Yeah, and
you can see a little bit
to the left, like you were saying, would have landed better.
Yeah, right. Yeah. If you would have been further up on his weak with your strong, then you would have had more control of his sword, and so him attempting to push your sword out of the way wouldn't have been as successful. But I think you still make contact here, so that's a good exchange to start the bout. Let's go.
Okay.
And you were correct there for taking the offense, right? Because you had a strong position, you were both in range, so it was, you basically had, right of way, so to speak.
Yeah.
Haha. Okay, so let's look at this exchange real quick. So a few things happen here worth talking about. So we begin, he's got a low posture. Again, for me, the way I tend to deal with low postures is I tend to point the structure of my sword at either their sword or their hands so that it's harder for them to beat my sword out of the way or all of a sudden come up and take my weak with their strong and thrust me simultaneously. But what you do here is you basically keep your point weak, and so when he goes to take, you Durchwechseln, which works for you here because he's going to take and not hit. If he were to actually thrust through your weak to you, then your Durchwechseln would have just gotten you killed. Does that make sense?
Yep, does. Because I've got that triangular position you were telling me about. My hands dropped, basically.
Exactly, right? So so if he takes his strong, right, and brings his shoulder level and strikes through you simultaneously, right? Then he hits you if you stay on him, and he hits you if you leave.
Okay.
Right? If you point your sword, if instead of pointing it up towards his face, you point it down towards his hand, right? Then if he tries to thrust through your weak, he runs into your strong. Right? And then if he, if he doesn't try and thrust your weak, if he tries to take, then your Durstwechseln is safe.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right, so let's go. So yeah, so here he's basically, instead of thrusting through your weak, he's using this action as a provoker. I'm not sure what he's trying to provoke from here, but coming to this hanging position against your Durstwechseln, or against the weak structure of your sword right there, is probably not the most optimal way of dealing with your particular configuration in that moment. You still have lots of time to get your parry off on your right side, right? He's striking a left overhouse, so you have lots of time to get your parry off on your right side, or potentially working into as that. So you might have actually thrusted him or did an Unterhau to his hands in that action, right? Because
Okay.
especially if your sword is already weak here,
Mm-hmm.
if he does a big provoker like that, then you're flying off the moment he makes contact anyway. So let's look at this. So he comes in. So as he lifts his hands, so right there, you could be thrusting towards his hand or doing some kind of Unterhau towards his hand as he comes up.
Okay.
And that's often the way I'll treat someone who like, anytime the hands come super, super high up for those Oberhaus on either side, I'm using my point or tag hits to try and get their point out in front of them more. So like, that's my initial tactical paradigm, is like, okay, if they're fencing with their strong, then I have to target their hands so that I can get their point out in front of them. And so, a quick thrust to the hand would just stop this action. But you still have time to get the parry if he decides to go left overhow. Ah, nice. Okay, yeah. So that was nice on his part. So he feinted the left overhow.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why targeting the hands is sort of better, because then you just shut that down, right? He can't. He has no feint there. So does he hit you in the leg here? Do you
I
know?
think he might have, and I don't know why I chased him down. Might have just been reflex from icebreaker rule set all day.
Yeah, like, it's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's a beautiful
that was nice, and a beautiful parry on his part too.
Yep.
Yeah. So again, what you can do in those moments is, instead of allowing him to put you in obedience that way, right? Because once he gets you at that distance and he has you in obedience, he basically just has to roll the dice at that point, right? It's
Yep.
a 50-50 mix up, right? He's like, I've got you in range. Any of these are going to hit. It's just whether or not you're going to guess the parry right,
Yep.
right? And so if you take that away from him by pointing at his hands, then when his hands come up like this to feint, you're just hitting him. You're hitting him in the hands immediately. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, we continue. Yeah, gets you in the leg.
I was like, leg head.
Okay. So this actually, I'm going to say that if your thrust was a little stronger, I think you would hit it. So when I say stronger, do you know what I mean by stronger?
Actually, like what we talked about, aiming and keeping that point in line over that target instead of deviating it like that, like I did running in. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So it's sort of like, we get, if they deflect our thrust, then having already weakened makes this follow-up action a little bit faster, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with it is that it ends up not requiring them to commit their parry, right? So if exactly, therefore the added speed that you get on the follow-up action is mitigated by the fact that they're already on that side,
Okay.
right? So stronger thrusts, and all you have to do is like, okay, I keep my chest, my hands, my hilt, my point all in one line, and then aim it towards this part of his chest.
Yep.
Right. So you see where my cursor is.
Yep.
Right. So you want to give him a black and blue, like not like we don't want to hurt each other, but like you want to consistently aim for this part of the chest, right?
Yeah.
So it's over my point, over my sword this way, right? And then if my sword is on this side, same deal, but on the other side, right? So, but the distance is good because you guys are in. So he's on the forward foot. His weight is moving backwards, but you guys are at distance here, right? So your action is going to be there's a pretty high likelihood of success from your part. If you strengthen this thrust, you're at a really good distance to go for a direct attack. So yeah, again, you can see the point is kind of up towards the mask and not towards the right side of the target, right? So,
okay.
Yeah, and so because of that, you're already you've deflected
Yeah.
yourself. He didn't even make contact
Yeah.
with you. Does that make sense?
Yep.
You hit him here 100 times out of 100 if you aim towards this side of his body.
Yep.
Watch it one more time. So right now you look like you're in line, and then you bring yourself out of line. All
Yep.
right. As far as because he didn't need to commit the parry, he still has this opening. Your arms on the left side, or the body on the left side, and you did the right thing by recognizing that and defending and not continuing with your offense. So I think you get a bind on top, right?
Right.
Now, if you wanted to be cheeky, right, you could actually hit him here with a short edge Unterhau to his belly. It's sort of like you put yourself in a bad position with that thrust. He did, he followed up, but because you stayed on his sword, you're strong now, and he's not working Indes, right? So he gave it back. He gave it back to you, and so you can take your offense back by striking Unterhau to the belly.
Wow, I didn't even see that as an option.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then a short edge Unterhau to the belly. And what's even better about that is that the only way that he parries that action, because of the configuration of his hands right now, right, is he has to bring his hands all the way down. And so if he gets the parry on the short edge Unterhau to the belly, now you've got a long edge Oberhau on the other towards the head on the other side. Does that make sense? And this is just Meyer square stuff. In fact, I bet you I can pull up. I've got an example of me doing something like this. Let me see here. This is going to be an old ass video. All right, here we go. But anyway, so while I'm looking at this, do you have any thoughts as of right now while I'm pulling this other video up of what you could be doing? Do you have any thoughts of what we talked about or what's going on?
Yeah, so that's something I've been trying to work on the last few days since we talked about it. And of course, can't fix it in a week, but that point deviation, I don't exactly know where it comes from. I mean, not that that super matters, but sometimes it just helps me figure out why I did it, you know what I mean, and why I
Hmm.
do that. Like where's that coping mechanism coming from? You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah. Well, I think in general, we like to feel like our point is in the face of our opponent,
yeah.
right? I don't think that that's yeah, here we go. I've got this. Um, Here we go. Beautiful. All right, so I'm going to show you. This is a video. This is from like 5 years ago or something. But so I'm kind of old and out of shape in this video, which apparently I'm younger now and in better shape than I was then. But yeah,
Benjamin Button.
so we'll come back to that one. Look at this. All right, and then we'll open this up, put it in slow motion. It's not the exact sequence, but it's pretty comparable sequence, right? So here we have, so I strike, so I'm threatening, so actually what I'm threatening here is an Auswenden, right? So
Yep.
I'm really making him commit the parry, right? So I'm forcing his hilt up to the right. This is a good way of dealing with people. This is when people start using their point, this is a good method of attack for them. If their point is in your face, it doesn't work as well, right? Because you eat their point. So if I'm fencing someone like you, I don't use this type of action. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But you can see how I'm trying to thrust around the hilt, right? So it's a short edge thrust around the hilt,
Yeah.
forcing his hilt up to that side, right?
Is
And then as he brings that up, strike the short edge there.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So again, so he lifts his hilt, strike the short edge to the belly, and then a long edge over the top.
Yeah.
All right. So in that case, I got both of them. But that's what you have here, right? Because his hands are he's hanging so strongly here, and you're strong, and he's behind. He's in the knock at this point, right? Could he have worked in this? Maybe. Let's see. So we're here. So yeah, he's trying. You're actually doing a pretty good job of being strong after the thrust, right? So you weren't being strong in the thrust, but you've kept sticky on his sword, which mitigated that cut. He tried to do a similar thing on
Yeah.
you, right? But because you were connected to his sword, you were able to follow it. And then that put him in the knock right here. So the moment that you hear that cross, he's hitting your cross right now, right? The moment you listen to it again, 27, right? So
I'm seeing
listen
the last video, by the way.
oh no. I'm sorry. You're
No, no worries.
do. Yeah. Thank you for
Yeah.
helping that. All right. So watch again. You're gonna thrust. You're gonna be weak in your initial thrust, but you're gonna maintain a stickiness on his sword so that you're able to mitigate his Unterhau to your belly. Right. So right there. Right. So your thrust just failed. He's going Unter to your belly. You stay sticky on the sword, right? Do you see that?
Yeah. If I
The
remember
moment
in
the
my
moment
head.
that well,
Oh,
so hold on a second. The moment
yeah.
that he strikes your cross,
Uh-huh.
you go Unterhau to his belly.
Okay.
All right. So watch again, and you'll hear the cross. Right there. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So the moment you get that Unterhau, the moment that you collect on the cross, you strike Unterhau to his belly. That's going to force his hands down, and it's going to give you an Oberhau on the other side. One more time. Go. Boom.
Okay.
All right. Does that make sense?
Yup. Yup. It really does. Okay.
All right. And all of this stuff, I'm gonna say this again. Just we've talked about this a bunch before, but all of this stuff, it's just a matter of reps, right? So create this particular condition, right? And you drill this 100 times, or really you drill it 1,000 times, right, over the course of several weeks, until you're just doing it so naturally that you're not thinking about it. And then guess what? You have one answer for one thing.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Right? And there's an infinite number of things. But as you grow, as you get better, you start to connect what you have and you start to develop a really coherent system of fencing.
Okay.
Right? So we'll continue. So all of this, all of this, actually, obviously we can't see a bunch of it, but
Right.
it's just, it's a good opportunity to talk about indes versus peri-riposte, right? So
Mhm.
what peri-riposte is you're in the vor, I'm in the knock, and then I'm in the vor, you're in the knock, and then you're in the vor, I'm in the knock, and then I'm in the vor, you're in the knock, right? And so you get a sort of boom, 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 boom kind of a thing, right?
Tennis.
It's tennis, right?
Yep.
That is not fencing. That's tennis, and it works in tennis, and it doesn't work in fencing. And it's not the worst thing in the world, but the quicker you can get from a tennis match to finding a moment to work inside of their action, the better. And the longer that you stay in a tennis match in range, the more of an opportunity that your training partner is getting for that same thing. Right?
Yep.
What you get instead is you get like these 50-50 mix-ups, right? Where you're striking a target and they're parrying, and you're just hoping that they parry the wrong thing, right? Like whatever it looks like you might be aiming for, you're hoping that they deviate, right? That's not the way that you have to do it. You have to get a proportionate advantage,
Yeah.
and then you have to strike them inside their parry, right? So you have to change as they're going to parry rather than you parry and then you do your follow-up action and hope that it hits. And if it doesn't, well, then you're ready to parry the next thing, right? For me, if I spend too long in that type of environment, I just back out, right? It's not worth playing that game because I'm going to get clipped eventually, right?
He did a really good job of keeping me in that game as I was trying to back out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, right. Yeah. For sure. It's because they're so enticing. But really, every offensive action that you made was an opportunity for you to retreat.
Yep.
Right? Every single offensive action that you made was an opportunity for you to retreat in that moment. So we'll look again. One other thing I'm going to say is that you are not targeting underneath the arms enough, right? So underneath the arms on his left side. So you had an opportunity here, right? You're looking at it right here. Boom. You take underneath the arms. There's another opportunity. Here, right?
Yep.
You're trying to strike through over his head here. Again, you could be targeting underneath the arms on this side. Right? Anytime someone's hanging parry like this, they're exposing all of this. Right? And so looking for moments. Now, sometimes it's hard because you're threatening, and that's what lifts their arms up, right? But if you feel like you have someone in obedience as you see their arms lifting, don't follow through with the strike. Command yourself and change index, right? And start working to the new opening. And it won't work initially as you're training this, right? But the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. And that's how you use those feints and things to create openings for yourself. All right. We'll continue. We'll do one more exchange or I think this is where I'm gonna be a little more critical than I have been.
That's fine.
Okay, what the fuck is going on here? Right?
Walking right ahead of my point.
So where'd you go wrong? So let's look at how things started to fall apart here. Okay. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being in a withdrawn posture, right? But that being said, you're pretty close. His point is kind of forward. Your point is not. You don't have any real control over his sword or his invariable thrust, right? And you guys are really encroaching distance, right? Your weight is fully on your forward foot, and your momentum is static. So you're not really in a position where you can withdraw if he does an offensive action here, right? And so like sometimes when I'm in a withdrawn posture and I'm encroaching the distance like this, then I try and keep a withdrawal available for myself, right? So like I'm trying to invite them to enter distance, and then I'm going to withdraw and take in that moment, so that if they enter distance and they stay taken, if they stay weak, then I can start my offense, right? But because it's sort of like tactically, it's not clear to me it's not clear to me what's happening here tactically. But there's a moment where both of you enter with a step. You both enter distance with a step, and neither has control, right? So we just look at this again. So right there, right? Like, if that never happens again, that'll be the best thing that ever happened to your fencing.
I did it to him later.
Right. Well, right. Right. It's just like, what? I don't even know. It's, I don't know, but it's fine. It's fine. Like, that's good. Like, we need to see these things, right?
Yes.
You just say like, okay, two people can't be like, and the thing is, neither has control, right? So it's not, I'm not here to criticize, I'm helping you see issues in your fencing, but like,
Yep.
I would say that in this case, you're both kind of wrong here, right? Because like neither has control, and you're both entering. Like, he's already committed. He committed out here, right? Look at when he commits.
Mm.
So he's committed right now, right? And now he's got the offense, right? You're in the knock, so it's safe. It's safe enough for him to commit. Although I will say that he's moving his body before his sword, so that's kind of a thing that I tend to nitpick. But generally speaking, he's safe here because you're in the knock, and so it's safe for him to commit his body, right? Now, I'd like him to get his sword out in front of him, which is probably the cue for you to say, I can take the offense here, right? Because he's not leading with his sword. He's not compelling you to move back.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. It does.
So he's already committed distance. He's already bringing his body in. And so you're thinking like, okay, his sword's not in front of him. He's entering distance. Maybe the answer is to just hit him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Even still, you don't need to take a step. Right? He's committed his distance. If you want to hit him in this moment, if you think that you could potentially get it off, then just bring your sword out in front of you. Close the line, right? If you can get your sword out and close the line, that he either eats your thrust or he has to commit on his left side, your right side, and that gives you a zukin. And you haven't committed any distance, so you're safe to retreat if you need to. But yeah. So yeah, again, go ahead.
Something that he mentioned to me that when we had this exchange that he told me later kind of informed him as like a cue of like, oh, I'm going to win this. He was saying that my Vom Tag was too forward and flat across my chest. So at least how he was saying it, like I cut out one of my rotational points from throwing that cut, therefore making it like inherently weak from the beginning.
Okay. So I think if I'm here, if my vom tag is across my chest,
Mm-hmm.
if my vom tag is across my chest like this, and my opponent's cutting at me from here, I can get my structure behind me, right? It collapses me a little bit, but I don't think that this necessarily, like if I'm standing like this, where I think you're standing with the right foot forward in the video.
Yep.
So if I'm standing like this and he cuts in, right, I can get to the structure, right? As long as I don't. It's when I enter. Actually, no. You're left foot forward, so you can still get here, right?
Oh, so this is what I mean. I'll get my messer out and show you. I was doing ye old purse clutch vom tag.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't necessarily think that's a terrible thing in the world.
Okay.
But go ahead.
But yeah, he was saying that like just instead of here to get that rotation, I was just kind of like, bleh. And so he was able to pass through.
Honestly, I feel like it's more about the direction that you're pointed and less about the structure of your cut. Because you're not, when we're cutting to close the line, we're not hewing, right? You're not going to cut through their sword no matter how hard you swing it, right?
Yeah.
You're just trying to get your structure out in front of you so that you can mitigate their action.
Okay.
All right.
Back to what you're saying. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But yeah, so the bottom line is, or actually, hold on, I'm in the wrong thing. The bottom line is, in this moment, the gravest mistake that you make here, aside from not pairing with the best structure in the world, right? And again, the reason that you didn't pair with the best structure is because when he's bringing his body in before his sword, he's kind of inviting you to strike into him and not to parry, right? So as he's entering distance without bringing his sword to bear, he's inviting you to strike into him and not to parry his action, right? And which, you did, but then more importantly, you stepped. So two ways I would have dealt with this differently is right here, he's commit his distance. I would have rotated my hips, rotated my sword, brought my point out. Now as it's flat, I can kind of see maybe it would be harder to get the long edge out in front. But I don't think it's necessarily impossible. But the bottom line is I would have taken my left foot, I would have swung it back.
Okay.
And I would have tried to find myself in a long point against the direction of his cut. And then if he worked in does that, then I, would have been in a little bit more trouble. And that's the danger of working from the knock.
So
But
essentially try to set up a Zorn Ort on it with kind of like a retreat.
Yeah, right. So but then you step in here, right? And then like this right here is just like we need to do better as a community. We just never we never need to see this type of thing happen ever again in the history of ever. But that's not, I mean, look, it's a pickup bout, right? Whatever, it's fine.
Right.
Like I even to this day, I do this, right? This isn't like you should be shamed for this. I do this, right? But we have to recognize
kind of like a coping mechanism that's developed out of the most recent metas, because I feel like I've started to see this kind of thing more and more. Or is this like an old thing?
Well, so I don't. So from my perspective, it's two guys coming in strong on strong, right? Like that's existed throughout all of fencing, right? That being said, Lichtenauer admonishes this, right? Meyer admonishes this. Everyone admonishes this. Like this is not what we should do. What we should do is we should have a clear sense of who's on the offense and who's on the defense, and that should come from sound fundamentals. And then we shouldn't try and take control of situations when we're in a defensive cycle, right? This is the equivalent. What you're seeing right now, Josias, right, this is the equivalent of you being in someone's guard and trying to rear naked choke or trying to cross collar choke them. Right? That's what's happening, right?
Yep.
Right? Does that make sense? It's like, and the thing is, like, in this case, based on what he did, it was sort of like he was trying to like do a Kimura on you from inside your guard, right?
Got
It's like you guys are both no one's clearly like no one's like recognizing, no one's setting themselves up in an offensive way in this moment, right? No one's setting themselves up in an offensive way, and or in a clearly offensive way, right? Is a better, because really he had the vor. If he had brought his sword out in front of him, that would have helped his case a lot. First of all, right? If he had brought his sword out in front of him and you responded the same way that you did, he would have hit you in the face, right? But that being said, you would have perceived that. So if he had brought his sword out in front of him before his body, then you would have perceived that he would have hit you in the face, and so that you would have already been compelled to withdraw in that moment, right? But because you felt like, okay, his body's coming into range, but his sword's not to bear, I have the offense? Like, I guess I have the offense. Everything happened so fast, so I'm gonna strike. And what that amounts to is both fencers stepping in at the same time, neither with control, and you end up with the strong on strong bind.
Yep.
Right. Great. Yeah. So we will do one more. I said we'd do one more, but this will be the last one.
Okay.
To do. Very close. All right. So this is the last thing that we're going to look at right here. So what are you trying to do in this action? Let's have you think critically about what's going on and what we can do to make it better.
Okay.
So what happened here?
I think I was trying to also send a direct attack, and then once he parried it and I felt that I was weak, I was like, well, I'm going to have to Zek roar and cut around, you know?
Yeah. So what could you have done to make this action a little bit better?
So I think this is like almost a repeat of that last one. Because we are super close.
Well, so you do something different. You commit the sword before the body. So this is better. This is generally better, right? So we're here. You commit your sword before your body, and so you compel his defense. So that's all of that is correct. You're very close. I will say that, right? This is not the distance that, especially with as powerfully and explosively as Zach moves, I would probably be a little bit more reticent to be withdrawn, right? So in a Vomtag, with his point forward like that, I don't like that personally, right?
Irish boxing.
Impossible. Yeah. All right, but here we go. So you're everything is fine so far. So that's your sword. Your sword is moving first, right? So you're committing the parry. So that's or you're forcing him to commit the parry rather, right? Mm-hmm. So that's good. All of that is good, right? So what happens? You say that you felt yourself go weak. When do you go weak? Let's look at it. Tell me when you see yourself going weak.
Okay. There.
Okay.
He ever hit me? Okay.
Right? So what's the problem here? What could you have done to make this better?
Lining it up. Like
you could have finished your you could have just lined it up well.
Yep.
Have been strong in the thrust and finished your thrust.
So, and then another thing, like with this concept of like strengthening and throwing good cuts at extension and things like that. I'm not sure if I was trying to like erroneously Zverhow him or not, because that does
I
kind of look
think
like
I
turning.
think I think what it often is sort of, we assume that they're going to parry, and so we're setting ourselves up for our second intention, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, he didn't give you the stimulus to set yourself up for a second intention. His parry was not sufficient to mitigate your thrust. Right? Just full stop. His parry was not sufficient to mitigate your thrust. You assumed that it would be. You weren't fencing with feeling. Right? You weren't fencing with feeling. You were anticipating his response, and you were working based on the assumption that his initial action was going to mitigate your first intention. Right? And so if you had kept everything in line in that moment, everything about this is perfect, right? Your sword comes forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the tip is moving a little slow for my taste, so maybe you get the tip moving a little faster.
Okay.
But still, he has not done anything to mitigate this action, right? So at this stage in this parry, if you're this far along, and what this should be is a Shisen, right? That's what this should be. This should be a Shisen. At this stage in your Shisen, you should either assume that he will commit his parry or he won't, and you finish your thrust. Right? There's no way for him to take at this distance and retake the vor. Okay? You, at this point right now, you are chasing Zach. Right? There's no question you're chasing Zach. He is in obedience. The only thing that he can do is withdraw and fence from the knock. All right?
Okay.
You get here. Everything, look, your strong is on his weak. Your point is essentially in line, right? Everything about this says that you hit him here.
Yeah.
Right? Everything about this says that you hit him here. Or at the very least, he does a last minute super explosive parry that commits his point to your right side, right? So if he can get his point over to your right side, like he withdraws the bind, so he like slides his blade so that it's making contact with the center of yours.
Yeah.
Right? And pushes with his point across your body. And then you have your second intention.
Duplaren,
right?
that instance, right?
Or you could Duplaren here. I would probably just strike around, honestly. At this stage in the action, I would probably just strike around. But either way, does he ever get his point across your body? Let's watch. He does get it across your body because you give it to him, but he's bound on your strong the whole time. So if he was bound on your strong the whole time, if he tried to push, then if you had good structure, it would have just gone nowhere. Right? You're already weak. You're already weak here. He's bound on your strong. You're already weak. Watch it one more time. So right here, yeah, look at the direction of his action.
Yep.
He's right on your strong. If you had oriented your point to the right side of his chest, you hit him here every single time.
Okay.
Right? And because you didn't, because you assumed he was going to parry well enough that he was going to give you this strike around, you didn't compel his action. And so because his point is still on because basically he didn't have to commit the parry. He's there on the other side waiting for you when you go for it. Right? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Now, that being said, he's lifting his hands again. So what are you doing now? What should you be doing now?
Cutting under.
Cutting under to his left side.
Yep.
Right? You're sort of committed to this overhaul, and he's, like I said, he's already ready because he never brought his point to your right side. So because he never brought his point to your right side, he's ready for this weak parry. But even then, you could still chase him, and he's still in the knock, right? He's still parrying. You still have a potential here of hitting the target underneath. But you're retreating, right? You're like, oh, this didn't work. So the last thing I'll say is that generally speaking, in a chase, you shouldn't be retreating.
Okay.
Right? Überlaufen means overrunning. The sort of historical hunting analog is that the dogs are overrunning the deer, right? So the deer are put on a path, and the dogs are chasing them down this path to get them to like a pen, right? And that's at the end. And like the deer can go different directions, but the whole point is that the dogs are overrunning them. They're gaining ground, right?
Yeah.
So as we get our opponent in obedience, as long as we're in a strong position and that we're acting with the correct action, we should be able to close distance safely, right? And
Yeah.
so, and as we close distance, our strength becomes more and more advantageous until eventually we overrun them, right? Until eventually we are so optimally advantaged that nothing they do will prevent you from hitting them, right? So instead of guessing, we're like, I'm going to go for this, right? I'm going to go for this, and I'm going to go for this if, when he parries, because I know that he's going to parry well,
Yeah.
right? So I do this, and then, oh, wait, he didn't parry well, and that made my second intention not work. And so now I have to back up and try it all over again.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So that's quite a bit. We got through quite a bit, and this will be, this will be uploaded for you to look at and review and like go over and stuff, and then like come up with. There's lots of ways that you can come up with drills here, to deal with this. I think probably three of the most important things are going to be, number one, your strengthening your thrust.
Yep.
Right. And then getting your training partners to give you two different types of feedback, right? A parry that's strong enough, a committed parry that's strong enough to mitigate your thrust, right? And then one, more importantly for you, one that isn't strong enough, right? One that they're pushing, but they're pushing suboptimally, and so you have to maintain course, right? Even as you feel the pressure, you have to maintain course through that. And you have to learn to oppose the pressure and hit simultaneously.
Yeah, that's what I struggle with the most, is keeping that pommel online and not just drifting off the second I get that.
The second you feel contact, you're like, oh, contact, so I'm going to let go.
Yep.
Right? It's like knowing like, oh, wait, no. There's contact, he's pushing, but I am still winning this, so I'm going to keep going. Right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing would be just developing the tag to the belly.
Okay.
Right? As soon as their hands go high, short edge to the belly.
Okay.
Right. And then putting that in a sort of a blender. Was there a third thing? Oh, don't step in. Right. If your opponent is closing distance and neither of you have control, withdraw. Try and take control first and then start closing.
Even in that retracted Fontag, just
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. Right. That's you can get it out in front of you, and you really need to withdraw, right? Because if you don't withdraw in that moment, and he does like bait you to parry, if you haven't brought yourself out of the creek, right? If you haven't created enough distance where you can get this next parry off safely, then you're going to do this and you're going to get hit here, right? So you've got to withdraw to create that distance so that your next parry is safe. And then if he doesn't throw the subsequent strike, well, now you're strong in measure, right? Now you can press your own advantage.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Cool.
All right, man.
I
hope this is valuable for you. And
valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll communicate soon.
All right. Sounds good, man.